Hey guys, this is heyybritny and welcome back to my channel. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the episode that Nick Fuentes did last night, episode 1548. Alrighty, so I saw on Twitter that Candace proposed doing like a second collab with Nick, and she talked about having Dan moderate after the first interview that they did almost a month ago. And I saw an update where basically she said that Nick didn't want Dan B to moderate, so I have no idea what's going to happen there. I did say in one of my last videos that I thought that Piers Morgan should be the one to moderate. I don't know if he is even a good recommendation, but I really do hope that they can have a second interview where they actually debate topics and they have a neutral person moderating. So to just recap some things that are happening, let me play this clip on Nick's assessment of the first interview.
Because you would think that Candace Owens got canceled by Daily Wire, so did I. You'd think we're both outspoken about what's happening in Gaza and Iran. You'd think we talk about that, but we don't. She brings me out, it seems like for no reason other than to try to attack me from a new angle. And the angle seems to be, look, I'm talking about Zionism. You're an anti-Semite that hates Jews for being Jewish. Very bizarre. And she puts it behind a paywall. And she goes after anybody that posts the interview, copyright striking. And it seems like what she wanted to do was to not give me the exposure. She wanted to fly me out, do a hit job, and then hide it behind a paywall so that I wouldn't get the exposure from being on her platform and gain an audience. And she has me out to kind of press me and make me look like some bitter anti-Semite. That seemed to be the program. And that was the consensus. You can look at any comment section on any re-upload of the video. That's the...
Okay, so he's definitely saying a lot there. A lot of this is information that we already know, and he's kind of just putting all of the pieces together in this episode. So we know that Candace had him out. We know that he didn't think that the interview was a good opportunity. He thought it was a missed opportunity because they should have debated different topics. And then she also focused on issues that they didn't really need to address because it was more just personal beef instead of strictly on politics. He also talked about how he kind of expected them to work together, being that they were canceled in the same way by Ben Shapiro with the Daily Wire and all of that stuff. And so I know that Candace has had Ian Carroll on her show, and she's kind of formed like a partnership with him in a sense. She's had him even do episodes while she was out on maternity leave, and this would have been a good opportunity for her to partner with Nick in that same way, especially given the way that they were both canceled. I do think that it may have been a little bit more difficult for him to like cover her show or something like that, but I think that she should have been open to doing more collabs with Nick. And I don't know if it's that people either saw how popular he was getting or they just thought that he would eventually get canceled despite the initial buzz and reactions to his clips that were going viral. And so I don't know if Candace's interview was a play to say, hey, we're anticipating him getting canceled, we're just doing this interview to hold him accountable for whatever, and then kind of go from there. So I don't really know what the angle was here. He says it's a hit job. I think that this was just a poorly calculated decision based on how they thought the public was going to react, one, to Nick's clips, and then also how they would react to this particular interview with Candace. Now, there was something that he said that I'm a little bit confused by. He said that he thought that Candace put the interview behind a paywall to kind of deny her the exposure that he would have gotten from her platform. So I'm not sure that I agree with that, because I don't know if it's the fact that he said hide behind a paywall that is kind of confusing me there, because when you hide something, you don't want people to see it. But I think some people are guessing that maybe she made $50K off of this one episode. So my take is that she put the interview behind a paywall because she thought that, or she knew that it would get exposure. She just expected that the interview would get him canceled and she might as well make money off of it. I don't blame her for putting it behind a paywall and wanting to make money, but I do think that she should have made the interview available for free. So I think that it was probably a hit job, but she didn't necessarily do it to deny him exposure. She was hoping that the exposure would make him look bad and get him canceled. So that's one part that I disagree with there. Okay, so let's just move into the timeline of things. So we have the interview between Candace and Nick. We have Candace going on Tucker. We have Nick responding to Tucker being caught in a lie, and then we have Candace doing an interview with Milo. We have Nick dropping part 2 of exposing Tucker Carlson, and then we have Milo posting on Twitter and Elon Musk responding. We also have a situation with Charlie Kirk. So with Charlie Kirk, he was doing his own show. He had someone call in, and that person basically asked, like, hey, will you debate Nick Fuentes? He obviously got nervous or whatever, answered the question, but then I guess later deleted his stream. And so they're saying, hey, he's really rattled and shaken by the idea or the possibility of having to debate Nick Fuentes. And so this got a lot of reaction on social media. Let's go ahead and play the clip of Nick Fuentes talking about Charlie Kirk kind of just in a general sense.
Let me tell you something. I am doing it for the kick, for the pleasure of wiping the smirk off of Charlie Kirk's fucking small, ugly face.
So here, this is just him trolling and being funny, but he is upset with Charlie Kirk for kind of like entering the situation, not wanting to debate him and kind of avoiding it, if that makes sense. And so there's this talk out there that everyone is scared to debate Nick Fuentes because it's not going to go in their favor. And so he's just calling out Charlie Kirk for kind of participating in this hit job that he feels everyone else is engaged in and not wanting to debate him because Charlie Kirk does go to college campuses and he debates teenagers, young adults, and all of that stuff. So he should be able to debate Nick Fuentes on the different topics that he is obviously willing to talk about. There was also a recent interview that Nick Fuentes did with Sam Hyde. I'm not familiar with Sam Hyde. I did start to watch maybe like the first 10 minutes of the interview, but I got distracted and never went back to watch it. So again, I don't know much about Sam Hyde. I'm not sure what is going to come out of this interview. And I do want to watch different interviews of Nick, but I also don't want to watch the same information being shared. So I'm not sure if there's anything new to learn in this interview with Sam Hyde, but I am curious about it. And then also, just to kind of round things out a little bit more cleanly, I do want to go back to talking about Elon Musk entering this drama. So basically, Milo tweeted, hey, you should look into Nick. You should get his Twitter removed, all of this stuff. And then Elon responds, and he's basically saying, hey, why is all of this stuff happening or not happening? Nick must be a fed. And so this is just creating more drama in this ongoing beef that originally started with just 3 people, Candace, Tucker, and Nick. Okay, so now there's some other things that I want to get into that were brought up. So Nick was quick to call out how hypocritical it was that Candace brought on Milo. He talked about how Candace didn't use that interview to confront Milo about the rumors and what he was saying about Candace's husband, George. And basically he was saying that Milo was saying that George is gay, this is a arranged marriage, and Candace is George's beard. So I think that these are definitely problematic things to say about someone's marriage, especially with how Candace talks about her marriage and how she frames marriage in general. So this is not something that you should take lightly or let go. So if this is true that Milo said this and she has not previously addressed this with him, she should have definitely used the interview as an opportunity to do that, the same way that she held Nick accountable in her interview with him. However, I am curious about whether or not they resolved this issue, Milo and Candace, off camera, because Milo would have been in her home, her husband would have been there, that would have been awkward. So I don't know if this is something that they've resolved already, if they resolved this off camera, or if they were willing to just put that aside in order to deal with the Nick Fuentes situation.
Well, you get hit with the Death Star laser. That's what's happening to me. So they will call this in the future. They will say this is the screw job of the summer. This is what happens. I am the people's champion. I have been speaking for the people from the beginning. I have been talking about white identity, Jewish power, the U.S.-Israel relationship from the very beginning. I was at Charlottesville as an attendee. I was at the Stop the Steal protests in January 6 in 2021. I was the architect of the Groyper War. And now that I'm on this generational run, after they took the boot off my neck, I got unbanned on Twitter last May. They stopped taking my clips down on Instagram in January of this year. And in 7 months, that's all it took. 7 months after they stopped censoring me intensely, overnight, I'm on a generational run. I'm the prize fighter that keeps winning championship races, championship fights and battles. I'm the people's champion.
Okay, so in that clip, he's definitely using a lot of positive language as far as explaining what's happening to him now, as far as all of the publicity that he's getting. He's talking about how he's the people's hero. People are rooting for him. People are seeing that all of these things have been done to him and they weren't necessarily the right things to do. And he's also talking about how he's basically like the underdog and he's having this overnight rise to fame. Not that he wasn't famous before, but this is really taking everything to a different level, because before he was kind of infamous and now he's kind of famous and he's kind of the hero and the underdog and the people that everyone is rooting for. And so I feel like he's definitely giving Rocky Balboa vibes, even though Rocky is from Philly and he's from Chicago. It's kind of like that same vibe that he's tapping into, where people might think, oh, this is just a joke or whatever, and then they get really invested and then they're actually rooting for that person to succeed and he becomes the people's hero. And so I really like how he's framing this, because he's really getting the narrative out there, or the messaging out there, that he really is a man of the people. He wants to do the right thing. He's America first, and he really wants to make sure that the people who are in positions of power are held accountable and that they're doing the right thing for Americans. He also talks about when he was unbanned from different platforms, and I actually think that this was a bad move that they made to ban him in the first place. If you had allowed all of his messaging to happen organically or naturally when he was first out in the public sphere in 2020 and 2021, his messages would have been received in a very different climate than what we have today. So it would have been easier for him to get canceled if he had been active on public platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, Facebook, and all of that stuff from 2021 to 2025, because that was a different climate. Whereas now his messaging is getting out there, but it's a different climate and people are more receptive to what he has to say. So if they just let him have this run 5 years ago in a different climate, they may have been getting a different reaction from the public to Nick Fuentes than the positive comments and the positive commentary that he's getting now. The support that he's getting now, to where people want to defend him, support him, and advocate for what has been done to him. And this is basically the same thing that they did with Trump. They should have just let Trump have 2 back-to-back presidential term, and then they would have been done with him. He wouldn't have been able to run again. He would have had his 8 years, and I don't know if he did his second 4 years back to back with the first 4 years, if he would have had the time to make the necessary changes to improve on his first term. So you basically gave him 4 years to fine-tune and kind of re-strategize and go about doing things a little bit differently, and giving him more power in his second term, because he has that break in between and can really spend that time to shift his strategy and messaging. Whereas if he had done all 8 years back to back, it would have been less time for him to get organized in a sense and to make those changes very quickly. Because yes, he's the president, but you still have to really work to get your stuff together and get the right people in position and all of that stuff. And so by letting him spread out his 2 4-year terms, they really gave him 12 years of power versus just the 8. Okay, so next I want to move on to this next clip from Nick Fuentes. So he is using the N-word here, and first I thought it was funny because he was saying the N-word with emphasis on the second G, and I don't know if that's how people normally say the word, so that just caught my eye, and I thought that that was funny, but I'll play the clip and we can talk about it.
I'm not doing it for the reasons everybody else is doing this stuff, because I've met them all, and I know them all, and they're all full of shit. There's got to be one real nigga. Can the real nigga please stand up? There has to be one real nigga left in America, in this damn country. Are there any real niggas left that aren't doing advertisements for gold and fucking pills? Are there any real niggas left that actually got censored and banned on YouTube? Where's the real niggas? And I'll die just to inspire another generation of them. I'll tell you who's a real nigga. Kanye West. Ye is a real nigga. I'm another kid from Chicago like him. I'm a real nigga. And I know that with everything I've done to this point, Notwithstanding whatever happens tomorrow or the next day or any other day, I know there's 1,000 real niggas that are inspired by watching the show. And they may have a lot of people fooled. Maybe in the end of it, they'll have a lot of people fooled. Maybe they'll get you to think I'm a horrible person, whatever. I know there's at least 1,000 real-ass niggas that watch the show, are smart enough to understand what I'm saying. They're going to take this information and they're going to blow up the second Death Star, whether I'm here to see it or not.
Okay, so he's also saying a lot in that clip, and what caught my eye was that he said the N-word instead of grapers, which is the normal term for his audience, his fan base, his followers, or the people who at least believe in his movement and what he is doing. So I at first didn't really understand why he was saying the N-word, especially since he is not tailoring his message specifically to Black people. So one, how are people going to react to him using the N-word? Is this just him trolling? Is he being very specific and strategic in saying the N-word? Is he neutralizing the negative connotations with that word and saying it and applying it to people who do what he does? And so there's a lot of good questions that you can ask about this segment of the episode that he did last night. And so one thing that I want to clarify is, or one thing that I want to say, at least in terms of how I'm receiving this, he's definitely speaking to a specific group of people with that hustler mentality, people who do the right thing no matter the cost to them. And then he's also talking about people who are being authentic and doing things for the right reasons and not just the rewards, because he does mention people doing commercials for gold and pills. And so he's saying that, you know, these people are just taking money to sell things that don't really matter, that sort of thing. And so I'm interested in why he used the N-word in this specific segment, because this is a very strong message, because this is a call to action to the people who believe what you believe to stand up and do the right thing. He's saying, hey, you guys don't have to hide anymore. You guys stand up and continue doing the work that I'm doing. And so I really think that this is not a effort to pit people against each other in terms of why the N-word is being used here. He's really neutralizing the word and saying, hey, there's a positive connotation associated with this word, or he could just be trolling. Either way, let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Now, with him using the N-word, I wanted to kind of do a separate video about this, but I think it's good to just include it in this video. And so I know that a lot of people have different meanings that they associate with the N-word. Traditionally, the N-word is used towards someone who is of color, someone who is Black, and it's really just a way to signal, hey, this person, you're less than, you do not have the same status with me. This is really a put down. So Black people have reclaimed the word, and instead of saying the ER, they just say the GA or the A at the end of it, and they are really reclaiming this word and kind of taking the stigma out of it, because before, it was white people saying it and making Black people very uncomfortable, and now it's Black people saying it and making white people uncomfortable, because one, they can't say it, and if they say it, it's a very different climate. They won't be met with passive behavior. It will lead to a confrontation, especially if you are someone who takes offense to being called that word by someone of a different race. I did see that Myron Gaines called him the N-word on Twitter, so I thought that this is funny because, again, this is reiterating the neutrality of the word. It's not being used in a negative sense here. This is really just a neutral word. It's replacing dude or bro or the person's name. There are no negative connotations when Myron Gaines says this about Nick Fuentes. I'll put the screenshot up so that you guys can see it, but basically someone is quoting what Myron Gaines said, I guess in a live stream, and it says, that's why they took this N's bank account. N is using their first and last name, so there's no mistake. So he's not saying, hey, Nick, this ignorant person is doing this behavior. He is really just using the N-word in a neutral way, and he is just using it the way that you would use dude or bro. So if he said Nick's name instead of where the N-word was, the sentence would still make sense. He's not calling out Nick in any way. He's praising Nick in this way, and he's using the N-word to do it and to refer to Nick while giving him this praise. So I am wondering how this segment of his show is going to be received on Twitter and social media. Are people going to be complaining about him using the word, or are they going to understand that he's using this word in a very positive and neutral way? I also want to clarify that I know that because some people have, or many people have different meanings that they associate with the N-word. We're not all using the N-word in the same way and with the same meaning. So that means that when people hear other people using the N-word, they could be misunderstanding how the word is being used. So I did see a YouTube video where someone was saying, hey, you know, my grandmother, she said that the N-word is an ignorant person. I'm not ignorant, so that word doesn't apply to me. And that's totally fine. People do rewrite how they perceive the N-word and what it means to them, and that's totally fine. But if everyone's not working with that same definition, they don't really know what you mean when you say that you're not that word or when you use that word against someone else. And so I think it's super important that we know how people are using the word and what it means, because one, it could just be a put down to say, hey, you're not as good as me, you're inferior. It could just be a neutral way to refer to somebody without using their name, or it could be a ignorant person. And so I did see a comment where people were saying, hey, you know, I didn't understand why Black people reclaim the N-word, and if it means ignorant person, why are they calling themselves ignorant? And that's really not how they're using it. They're using it in a neutral way and in place of dude, brother, or the person's name. Next up, I want to talk about the January 6th testimony. And so I did see a post on Twitter where basically people were calling out, or I think it was Candace specifically, and maybe Milo, they were calling out how in the transcript, I guess, of his testimony, there was a portion where it said that he went off the record and then he came back on the record. So the insinuation there is that maybe he did something shady while they were off the record and then came back on the record and said something else. So they think that because he went off the record, this means that he's shady and that he may be CIA or some type of asset. So let me go ahead and play the clip of him talking about why people were arrested for J6.
Evidence. Maybe this will be more compelling. So as I said, out of 2,000 January 6 defendants, they all had one among three things in common. They were either one, on protected or restricted Capitol grounds, which I was not. They were two, vandalizing infrastructure or fighting with cops and media, which I was not. Or three, they were members of the Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, or Three Percenters. Every single one had one of those things going on except me. People retort and they say, well, what about Brandon Straka? They say Brandon Straka, well, he was charged, but he also was not in the militia, also did not fight with the police, also was not inside the building. So what do you have to say about that?
Okay, so in that clip, he's basically explaining the different reasons why people were charged, and he's saying, hey, you know, I didn't do any of these three things. And then there's two people, I believe, that Brandon guy and then Ray Epps, and basically he's saying, you know, there are other people who were charged, but they didn't do anything like you said you didn't do anything. Why is it different for them than what it is for you? So what they're trying to say here is that you were either charged to cover up the fact that you are a Fed or an asset, or you were charged with something and then you became an asset. You informed to get yourself out of trouble. And so he, at this portion of the episode, he goes through different evidence to explain why he wasn't on the Capitol grounds. He pulls up a map and shows that he was 500 feet away from the Capitol building. He explains that he led people away from the Capitol building, and then he talks about how he didn't assault people and all of that stuff. And so he is referring back to that transcript and saying, hey, you know, in this transcript, I said that I didn't give any of my devices, I didn't have any interviews, I didn't reveal any information. So what he's saying here is that he is not a Fed, he didn't cooperate in the sense of he didn't inform on anyone to get out of trouble, and he's also asserting that he's being accused of being a Fed or an asset by people who have clear ties to different organizations that are kind of working to go against America and the American First movement. Okay, next up, in relation to J6 and his testimony, he talks about how I think in December he received payment, maybe November or December, he received payment via Bitcoin. He received 13.5 Bitcoin, that equates to about $250K. And he talked about not really knowing who sent this money to him. He also talked about wanting to get in touch with the person, but they never responded. And then what he reveals is that this was a French guy who was like a programmer or a hacker who had some type of health issue that he couldn't recover from, and he was going to unalive himself, and the person wanted to give away his wealth to far-right causes that he supported and wanted to see do well. So he gave money to specific people, and Nick Fuentes was one of those people, and he received the most money. And so because of everything with J6, he was saying that they associated that payment with what happened on J6, and that was why they ended up freezing his bank account, which he said had $500K in it. So I can't imagine losing $500K and not being able to access that money. He did talk about how he had other accounts, I think, that weren't frozen. I'm not quite sure if I heard that right, but basically he was really freaking out because of that one account being frozen and how much money was in there. And then he was also talking about how much money it cost to hire lawyers and fight the cases that he was fighting in relation to J6. Now, in relation to everything with J6, he also dropped screenshots on Twitter live while he was streaming. And if you weren't really watching the stream and then you just saw him release all of these tweets, you probably would have been freaking out or trying to figure out what was going on. So that was kind of cool that he just dropped them on Twitter like that. But basically, what he dropped was a screenshot of a conversation with Milo. And basically, on January 5th, Milo is saying, hey, the feds spoke to me. They said that they didn't want me to go to wherever the White House, the Capitol, on January 6th, which was the next day. There's going to be problems, all of this stuff. And so in this screenshot, it basically reveals that Milo was given a tip or given information not to go to January 6th because there was going to be problems. And so Nick is saying, hey, this is proof that he's an informant, that he's an asset, because he's clearly receiving information, being warned, being ordered not to go. Otherwise, if he goes, it's going to be obstruction and all of this stuff. And so he's saying this is clear evidence that this is someone who is working with the government, who is an asset. One thing that Nick said that was confusing to me is that he mentioned that somebody, I'm assuming it's cops or government officials, whatever, saying, hey, we can't protect you from Antifa. He also mentioned having to wear a bulletproof vest. And so I was really confused on who said that to him and how that was kind of different from what Milo was saying was happening. So if you want to add that in the comment section below, let me know. And the one question I have about this particular situation is that if Nick got the information on January 5th that something crazy was going to happen and that Milo basically wasn't going to go, why did you still go to the Capitol on January 6th? And so I find that interesting because, one, you could have avoided trouble by not going, but also Nick clearly stated that he wanted to show up to these different events. He's fighting for the movement. He's fighting for the cause. He has to kind of show up. And so if he doesn't show up and he is connected to the situation with Milo, people are also going to think that he is this asset or working for the government. So he's kind of in a tricky situation because either you do something and you are accused of being an asset, or you don't do something and you're accused of being an asset. So in this situation, I think the right thing to do is to show up and deal with whatever happens, because that shows that you really are that committed to your organization, your movement, that you show up anyway despite what you think may happen or what you know may happen because of information that you have gotten. Okay, so now to move into a different gear, he talks about JD Vance a lot in this episode, and he basically talks about how JD Vance is not good for Trump, and he talks about how JD Vance was never Trump. He was selling his book, he was unelected as a civilian, he became a senator, then became the vice president, and he talked about how Peter Thiel is basically backing JD Vance this whole way. He talks about how Peter Thiel is a CIA asset, or at least a former employee, and so this is clear evidence that other people have CIA connections that Nick doesn't necessarily have, but they are accusing him of being an asset. And so he was saying that JD Vance was bad for Trump because he was basically going to ruin MAGA from the inside out just because of all of the different connections that he has that leads back to the CIA. Nick also talks about how Trump was called by different people and told to pick JD Vance as his vice president, otherwise the CIA would try to kill him and all of that stuff. And so he was kind of saying that Trump was forced to pick JD Vance. And I know that Candace talked about this on her show, and I can't remember everything that she said about JD Vance. I think that she said that she didn't know a lot about him, but she heard good things. And then she was also really concerned with making sure that Trump had a assassination-proof VP, meaning that that if people tried to assassinate President Trump, they wouldn't be able to use the vice president to carry out their mission instead of whatever Trump wanted and what Trump represented. And so I don't know if after that, if she then said anything negative about JD Vance, but Nick did call her out to say, hey, you need to go after JD Vance, you need to hold him accountable, and you need to criticize him and see what happens to you when you do what I'm doing, basically, of calling out other people of being assets or betraying Trump or going against the movement. Additionally, Nick calls out how Milo, when he was on Candace's show, basically said something to the effect of not really understanding why being associated with Peter Thiel was a bad thing. And so at this point, what Nick does is he pulls up some article, and the headline is basically saying, hey, Peter Thiel is a former FBI, CIA asset or something like that. And so he's basically saying, you have this guy on your show who's questioning Peter Thiel and saying that basically it's not a bad thing, but clearly he's an FBI informant or whatever. What he's pointing out is the hypocrisy. So you're saying that there's nothing wrong with Peter Thiel and it's fine that he is a former CIA agent, asset, whatever, but you're accusing me of being a asset as if that's a bad thing, and then also as if it's true. You can't say that it's okay for some people to have these CIA connections and not be assets, and then say that other people are CIA assets without having those same connections, or is not wanting to work in that way where they are trying to undermine Trump or implement a different agenda than the American First movement that Nick is a part of. And lastly, Nick also talked about Trump's rise. So we talked about how 2016 was very different from what was happening in 2024. He talked about how MAGA was basically against corruption and it was an anti-corruption campaign. And he says that everything that Trump has done as far as starting a war in Iran, not deporting people, it is betraying this. And it's showing not necessarily his true colors, but it's showing that Trump may not be MAGA first or America first. And so this was definitely a good call out. He also talked about how MAGA and I guess Trump has been infiltrated by Silicon Valley bros. So that would be Facebook, Amazon, and Apple. We saw all of those guys at the inauguration. And so he's talking about how there are different things and outside influencers that are influencing Trump in making these decisions that aren't necessarily American first. Alrighty, so that was quite a lot that we talked about in this episode. I didn't cover every single thing that he brought up, but I did try to organize everything into easy to understand segments within this episode, because a lot of it was either repeated throughout the interview or it was talked about in different parts of the interview. So I really wanted to kind of put everything together and talk about each section as a whole and then kind of move on to the different sections or topics that he talked about. And so hopefully everything made sense with the way that I laid it out. So this was definitely very interesting. I'm interested to see what happens from here. Are we going to get a collab with Candace and Nick? Who's going to moderate? Are we going to get a sit down with Candace, Tucker, and Nick? And who else is going to get involved in this beef? I really feel like Nick's energy at this point should be like Donnie Creed in the Creed movie, where he's basically like, I'll just play the clip so you can understand the energy that I'm talking about.
Here, on you.
Kill her, right? He'll kill her, right, little dude? Where was you at when I was in group homes, huh? You miss a meal? Nah. Which one of your killers in here next? You pick them. You pick who's next.
So I know that in the movie that situation didn't pan out, like he got knocked out by that other guy who stepped up, but it's the fact that he's confident, he's angry, and he's challenging the next person. And I don't think it's going to go like that for Nick with the next person. I think that he's really just going to knock down all of these dominoes and it's going to get wild, it's going to get crazy. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to happen next and where we go from here. So hopefully you guys like this episode. Let me know what you guys are thinking down in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.